Yo, what's good with you? Back in black with another Enlisted video. If you guys are new to the channel and you love shooting games just like me, make sure you aim for that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well. It'll help you find better teammates and improve skill-based matchmaking. At least I hope so. In this video, we're going to be comparing all the BR2 rifles for the Japanese faction and Enlisted to see which of them is the best for you in your particular playstyle. Coming up first, we'll be taking a look at the Type 99 rifle, the early version to be precise. And for anybody wondering, when it comes to Japanese rifles, the early version is always going to be better than the late version of a rifle. You can essentially consider it or think of it as getting a rifle fresh out of the factory as opposed to getting one that has been used and worn down for years and years. Fun fact again, this is the only BR2 rifle for the Japanese that still operates on a bolting system. So for any players out there who just prefer bolt action rifles or want higher damage over a higher fire rate, this gun is probably going to be the end of the line for you for your low tier endeavors. But before I get into that, I do want to give you some more background information on this weapon. Unfortunately, the Enlisted description doesn't give us much in the way of lore, aside from telling us that the cartridge is chambered in 7.7 by 58, which is very powerful. But speaking on the cartridge a little bit more, you guys should also know that during the Second Sino-Japanese War in the 1930s, they realized that this particular bullet was superior to the 6.5 by 30 millimeter, which was being used on all their Type 38 rifles from BR1. They wanted to replace all the Type 38s for the entire army, but the outbreak of World War II caused a huge strain on Japan's logistics, so they just ended up using both rifles extensively. Towards the end of the war, production was simplified, making the rifles extremely crude, which is why the early version is being emphasized for this review today. However, despite being on the better side of quality and finish, it somehow has a even worse damage than the late version of the Type 99, which still comes in at a faction highest 22.6 per shot. I just thought I'd point out that peculiar difference, but you'll still be dropping everything you hit with such overkill on the damage rating. Out to 100 meters, that'll drop down to 17.7, which is still stellar. So as usual with most bolt action rifles, one shot equals one kill 90% of the time, no matter the range. Always a good pick for, anybody who is a quote-unquote sure shot. The bullet velocity is also going to be highest in the tier at 730 meters per second, so minimal shot leading will be required on this weapon compared to the other two competitors we'll be looking at a little bit later. The main pitfall for any bolt action rifle compared to any other small arms weapons type is usually going to be that fire rate, which for this rifle is definitely going to be coming in at a tier worst of 48 rounds per minute, since the other two rifles are of semi-automatic origin. Bolting between your shots means that you won't be as effective at close range unless you either A, stick by cover to hide between your shots, B, never miss and make sure you make good use of your bayonet in close range, and C, if you do find yourself fighting in close range and you run out of bullets after killing 5 people and stabbing another for 6, at that point you just gotta switch to your pistol or your second rifle if you happen to be using the overkill perk instead of the backpack slot. Speaking more on option A though, if you are sticking to cover and shooting enemies, you will have to wait 3.1 seconds between your reload, which is surprisingly still second best in the tier. But even with that said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend inserting individual bullets in the middle of a gunfight unless you know for a fact you have enough time and distance between your enemy or you're invested in the reload speed perk. I say that because I do understand wanting to be topped off, especially when you only have 5 bullets maximum, but you have to be a little more vigilant when it comes to reload timing on a bolt action rifle, and you're just not dealing with a detachable magazine in close quarters combat. Something else the Type 99 will excel in aside from damage is definitely going to be that shot deviation, coming in at a tier best stat of 15, and it's not even close when you look at the other rifles by comparison. So I would say if you value accuracy overall, that is definitely something to note here. Feel free to let off all 5 of those shots as fast as you can, especially when being swarmed. As I say with many bolt action rifles, I view recoil as a non-factor since you have to rechamber between all of your shots, and that alone can cause you to lose sight of your target unless you're using the newly revamped straight pull or lever action weapons, which Japan has none. So yeah. The last thing I wanted to talk about that's going to be of extreme if not the utmost importance on any rifle, no matter the operating system, is going to be the iron sights, which sadly I got to say leave a lot to be desired in my personal opinion on the Type 99. Not the worst thing in the world, but they really only work when a target is standing still, unsuspecting of your gaze, or running at you in a straight line because he doesn't know any better. Once you spot a player that is using any type of horizontal movement, or even if you see a bot that is moving in their usual janky ways, sometimes or very often that can and will mess you up. And if you haven't heard me say it before, I guess I'll say it again. Missing with a bolt action rifle is damn near a sin. Coming up for contestant number 2, we shall now take a look at the Type Hiei rifle, which was invented by Dr. Masaya Kawamura in 1932 and was one of the only 3 self-loading rifles commissioned by the Japanese Imperial Army for military trials. Unfortunately, none of the self-loading rifles Japan, tested were actually ever adopted due to the high production cost and their really bad logistics, but this is a video game, so we get to take some liberties there. The damage on the Type Hiei is going to be tied for lowest in the tier at 11.6 per shot, which is barely over the killing threshold, and that's if you hit them in the chest or the head more often than not, which means out to 100 meters we're going to be very disappointed as we only get 9 damage per shot, which means in a lot of situations, particularly the further the target gets from you, you're going to basically be having to put in 2 shots to get a kill more often than not. When you look at the damage chart that is provided by the game, you will notice that the distance jumps from 10 meters to 100 meters, so I'm sure a lot of the fine details will be easy to miss for most people. But basically, because our maximum damage is already so close to 10 at the maximum damage range, it would be safe to assume that our damage dips below that killing point somewhere in the 40 to 70 meter threshold. So when you couple that with the tied for worst in tier bullet velocity at 660 meters per second, that means you actually do not want to spend any of your time fighting at range with the Type Hiei, but it will actually do you a lot of good to close the distance as much as you can. Cautiously though, because you still only have 5 bullets in the magazine with a middle of the pack fire rate that sits at 260 rounds per minute, so getting your squad outgunned in terms of bullet output is still very possible. I say all of this because when you think about it from a pragmatic standpoint, if you're constantly putting yourself in situations where you have to take 2 out of your 5 bullets to kill 1 dude in a game where you're constantly fighting entire squads of people, that is just a very tall task to ask of anybody, whether you're good at the game or not. And it just becomes one of those things where positioning is one of the most important skills that you can develop using this weapon, or any weapon with a small magazine for that matter. Something that's cool about the Type Hiei, if you do a partial reload, you do get an extra bullet in the chamber. So that being said, not only do I imagine most of you will be reloading quite often with this weapon, I actually encourage it, and you should know that even though I am encouraging you to reload as often as possible, we are getting a tier worst reload speed at 3.2 seconds, which is crazy to think that it is slower than the Type 99, which is a bolt action, but is only losing by 0.1 seconds. But still, man, that's kind of a kicker. Another part of the reason you'll want to fight a little bit closer with the Type Hiei is going to be rooted in the shot deviation, which is coming in at a stat of 25, which is going to be middle of the pack, but still a far cry from the Type 99, which is coming in at 15, like I said earlier. Since we are talking about a semi-automatic rifle now instead of a bolt action, recoil does become more relevant, and I am happy to report that we are getting a best in tier recoil, coming in at a vertical stat of 36 and a horizontal stat of 24. Add on 1 or 2 vertical recoil control perks for your soldier, and this rifle essentially becomes a 5-shot laser beam, and I feel even more comfortable making that comparison when you look at the iron sights, which are wonderful for tracking any stationary or moving target that is going in any direction. Nice and open on the aperture with a singular front post that's not too slim or not too thick, in my personal opinion, really allows you to stretch out this rifle to even further ranges than is recommended. Not that the damage would necessarily suit it unless you fully upgrade the weapon, but you can get some long range headshots in there beforehand if you are good at aiming in general. I just want to emphasize that this rifle is geared towards medium to close range combat for maximum effectiveness. Coming up for our last rifle of the day, we now gotta see what the Type Otsu rifle is talking about. Of course, this was another one of the 3 self-loading rifles that was trialed by Japan but never made it in real life. The weapon was co-designed by Sadamitsu Taguchi and Kajiro Nambu, which I'm sure a lot of you would be familiar with that second name. And essentially, the weapon was reverse engineered from the Czechoslovakian ZH-29 rifle, which can be found in the Western Axis faction. If you guys want to take a look at that, we will be covering that in the future. Unfortunately, during the trial, the rifle dropped out of the competition due to having inferior accuracy by comparison, and that is a reoccurring theme that we will be getting into when we look at the stats. Max damage, like I said from the previous rifle, is going to be tied for worst in the tier at 11.6 per shot. And this is definitely something that vexes my mind, because if you take a look at the Enlisted description for the weapon, they literally go out of their way to talk about how the weapon has increased damage. But it's just like one of those like, like, what are you talking about, dude? And I don't know why this is like, they always do this. I think somebody over there just needs to like do a pass on all the weapon descriptions and make sure you're not saying something that's like completely contradictory to the player when they go and read it in the actual game, because this is just like something that I constantly run into like almost every video that I make. But aside from all that complaining, bullet velocity is also going to be tied for lowest in the tier at 660 meters per second again, so it just shows that this rifle is in the same wheelhouse as the Type HE. The differences begin when we start to take a look at the rate of fire, which is going to be best in the tier at 380 rounds per minute. But I will be the first to ask the hypothetical question: does the boost in the fire rate even matter when we still only get 5 shots per reload and it does the same damage as the Type HE? I would personally argue no, but you may be ecstatic to see that there are some more meaningful differences when you take a look at the reload speed, which is also going to be best in the tier at 2.3 seconds. Honestly great when you think about how often you'll have to be reloading with this thing. But alluding back to what I in the game description was saying earlier about the reduced accuracy, we got a few problems here. The first is going to be the worst in tier shot deviation at 26, not losing by a large margin in comparison to the Type HE. But if you only got 5 shots, I'm probably going to choose the rifle that gives me a better chance of hitting those shots to kill my target. Something else that puts a huge damper on the accuracy again for the Type Otsu as I try to make good use of that fire rate is going to be the recoil, which comes in at a vertical stat of 66 and a horizontal stat of 34. And if you exclude the vertical stat from the bolt action that we talked about earlier, you can see that the Type Otsu is going to have the worst recoil in the tier, no matter which perspective you look at it from. Definitely going to need some of those recoil control perks to get good use out of this thing, but it might not even matter when you take a look at the iron sights. Like I said, man, the last ingredient that is missing from completing the recipe of bad accuracy on a rifle is going to be the iron sights. And I gotta say, on the Type Otsu in particular, it's gotta be top 5 worst aiming experiences in the game, on par with most of the Carcano rifles except for like one of them. Not only is the iron sight offset from the weapon, they proceed to add insult to injury by giving you an obstructive aperture with a giant triangular Dorito front post that also has a hood over it, which basically always obstructs the target that you are trying to look at more often than not, and that basically just forces you into even more closer range situations than you would probably prefer to be in with this rifle, considering that you only have 5 bullets per magazine. But now that I think about it, considering the fact that they were also lying about the increased damage, it's not like you would necessarily get to reap the benefits of trying to use this rifle at longer range anyways, right? Like, I hope they take a look at that, because this thing, I don't see the reason for it. But yeah, man, overall though, these BR2 rifles for Japan and their distinctions actually makes it pretty easy for me to order them in terms of like what I would recommend if you had to choose one, or just for overall effectiveness. Coming in last is definitely going to be the Type Otsu rifle. Not only are we being toyed with visually with the improved damage statement, but the only thing the devs were truthful about with this rifle is the reduced accuracy, and that accuracy is indeed being attacked on all fronts, from shot deviation to recoil to having quite possibly the worst iron sights in the entire faction, if not indubitably so. Even with the best reload speed, this was an easy decision for me to put the Type Otsu in last place. It's kind of like a throwaway gun. Smoothly coming in second place is going to be the Type 99 early version. You honestly don't have to do much to be better than the Type Otsu rifle. Just give me a more usable iron sight and you're giving me more damage, and I get to keep the bayonet, which is standard on all Japanese rifles. I will gladly forego my semi-auto capabilities, and I don't even mind reloading a bit slower. And speaking of reloading a bit slower, coming in first place is going to be the Type Hiei rifle. It may sound a bit hypocritical considering what I just said about the Otsu, but there is a reason. I've said this before, but a lot of the score weight for a rifle really falls into the iron sights category, and the Type Hiei by far has the best aiming experience in the entire tier. It's not always going to be a one-hitter quitter like a bolt action would, but you can still get a good portion of one-hit kills so long as you operate within the appropriate ranges or you fully upgrade the weapon. Once you do fully upgrade the weapon, that effectively increases your one-hit kill frequency and your range overall, which clearly makes this rifle the most versatile in the entire BR2 tier for the Japanese faction. And this is the one I had the most success with in my gameplay gathering for the video as well. So with all that being said, I'm pretty comfortable putting the Type Hiei in first place as the most appropriate spot. But I do want to know what you guys think. At the end of the day, these are just my personal opinions. I am hoping with the combination of the gameplay and my explanations, you can decide for yourself which rifle is best for you to spend all your silver on, and spend your silver upgrading over and over again for your BR2 Japanese rifleman. If you made it this far, do let me know by dropping a like on the video. I do appreciate you guys very much for making it this far, and let me know which of these rifles is your personal favorite down there in the comments section. And yeah, other than that, I do appreciate you guys very much for watching. Don't forget to aim for that like button and shoot that subscribe button as well. Help you find better teammates and improve your skill-based matchmaking. And yeah, hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Black Guy out.